The first snowflakes fell on November 7th at exactly 3:42 in the afternoon. Sarah Whitmore knew this because she had been watching the thermometer outside her ranger station window drop degree by degree since dawn. 34 years of managing the Kaibab Plateau wildlife corridor had taught her to read weather like other people read newspapers. This storm would be different. She could feel in her joints and see it in the way the ravens had abandoned their usual perches 2 days earlier. Her Alaskan Malamute, Luna, lay in her usual spot near the wood stove. The dog had not moved from that position in 4 months except to drink water and reluctantly eat the small portions Sarah managed to coax down her throat. Luna's thick gray and white coat had lost its luster. Her eyes, once bright amber and alert, now held a flatness that made Sarah's chest ache every time she looked at her. The puppies had been due on June 19th. Sarah had prepared the whelping box weeks in advance, reading everything she could find about Malamute births, consulting with the veterinarian in Fredonia 3 times. She had taken a week off work, arranging for Tom Hendricks from the southern station to cover her territory. Everything had been planned, prepared, anticipated. Nothing had prepared her for coming home to find Luna lying in the whelping box, surrounded by 6 perfectly formed puppies that would never take a breath. The vet said it happened sometimes. A uterine infection, undetectable until too late. Luna had delivered each puppy and tried to revive them, licking them clean, nudging them toward her belly. For 3 hours she had worked before Sarah found her, still trying, still hoping. That was 147 days ago. Since then, Luna had simply stopped. Stopped playing. Stopped greeting Sarah at the door. Stopped doing anything except existing in the smallest, quietest way possible. The vet had prescribed medications that Sarah dutifully administered. She had tried every suggestion. Special foods, gentle walks, even bringing in another dog for companionship, though Luna had shown no interest. Sarah understood grief. Her husband Michael had died 7 years earlier, a stroke at 53 while they were hiking the North Rim together. She had held his hand as the life left his eyes, there on the trail where they had first kissed 30 years before. People had told her the pain would ease. They were right, though it took longer than anyone admitted. But Michael had lived a full life. Luna's puppies never got that chance. Somehow that made it worse. Sarah had gotten Luna 3 years after Michael died. The loneliness had become unbearable. The cabin that had once felt cozy now felt like a tomb. She would come home from 12-hour shifts checking trap lines and monitoring migration patterns to find nothing but silence. She started talking to herself just to hear a human voice. Started leaving the radio on all day, even when she was gone. Started dreading the end of her workday because it meant returning to emptiness. The breeder was a woman named Margaret Shun, who lived 2 hours north in Kanab. Sarah had driven up on a Saturday in March, telling herself she was just looking, that she was not ready, that getting another dog would somehow be betraying the memory of Bear, the German shepherd she and Michael had raised together. Bear had died 6 months after Michael, as if the dog had held on just long enough to make sure Sarah would be okay, then gave himself permission to follow his person into whatever came next. Margaret's place was chaos in the best way. 8 adult Malamutes, various ages, all friendly and vocal and desperately wanting attention. Sarah sat in the yard and let them swarm her, their enthusiasm infectious. For the first time in months, she laughed, really laughed. Then Margaret brought out the puppies. 7 of them, 10 weeks old, tumbling over each other like furry potatoes. 6 were typical Malamute colors, gray and white, black and white, red and white. But one was different. She was smaller than her siblings, with a coat that was almost silver, and she had amber eyes that seemed far too wise for a puppy. While her brothers and sisters played and wrestled and explored, this one walked directly to Sarah, climbed in her lap, put her paws on Sarah's chest, and looked in her face with such intensity that Sarah felt something crack open inside her. She named her Luna because those amber eyes reminded her of moonlight. The puppy came home that day, riding in a crate in the passenger seat of Sarah's truck, occasionally yipping to make sure Sarah was still there. Sarah talked to her the whole way, feeling foolish but unable to stop. She told Luna about the cabin, about the work, about the mountains and the wildlife and the long winters. She told her about Michael, about how much he would have loved her. She told her about Bear and how she hoped Luna would not mind living up to a big legacy. Luna settled into cabin life, like she had been waiting for it her whole short life. She followed Sarah everywhere, learning the rhythms of ranger work, the early mornings and late nights, the long hikes and the quiet hours of paperwork. She was smart, almost unsettlingly so. Sarah only had to show her something once, and she understood. By 6 months old, Luna could open doors, retrieve specific items by name, and seemed to have an innate sense of when Sarah was upset or stressed. The bond between them grew deeper than Sarah had thought possible. Luna was not just a pet, or even a companion. She became a partner, a confidant, a reason to keep going on the days when grief tried to pull Sarah under. When Sarah woke at 3 in the morning missing Michael so badly she could not breathe, Luna was there, pressing her solid warmth against Sarah's side, reminding her she was not alone. Sarah had not planned to breed Luna. The idea had not even occurred to her until Tom Hendricks mentioned that his brother in Colorado had a champion Malamute male and was looking for appropriate females. Sarah surprised herself by saying yes. Maybe it was because Luna had brought so much life back in her world. Maybe it was because watching puppies grow seemed like a way to affirm that life continued even after loss. Maybe she just wanted to see Luna be a mother because she sensed the dog would be extraordinary at it. The breeding happened in February. Luna stayed with Tom's brother for a week, and Sarah was shocked by how much she missed her. The cabin felt wrong without Luna's presence, without the click of her nails on the hardwood, without her soft snores from the dog bed by the fire. When Sarah picked her up, Luna nearly knocked her over with enthusiasm, vocalization, and full-body wiggles. Tom's brother said Luna had been a perfect guest, but had clearly spent the whole week missing Sarah just as much. The pregnancy was confirmed in March. Sarah began preparing immediately, reading everything she could find, puppy-proofing the cabin, setting up the whelping box in the bedroom, where she could monitor Luna constantly. She bought supplies, made lists, created emergency protocols. She was not going to let anything happen to Luna or the puppies. She had lost too much already. This time, she would do everything right. Luna seemed to understand what was happening to her body. She became more careful in her movements, more selective about her activities. She started arranging her blankets in specific ways, creating nests in various corners of the cabin. Sarah would find her lying with her head on her belly, as if listening to the puppies inside, her expression peaceful and content. In late May, Sarah took a week off work. Roger had tried to argue that she did not need that much time, that most dog births were straightforward, but something in Sarah's voice made him back down. She wanted to be there for every moment, wanted to make sure Luna had everything she needed, wanted to witness this small miracle of life. The contractions started on the evening of June 18th. Sarah was ready. She had towels, heating pads, her vet's number on speed dial, a detailed checklist of what to watch for. Luna seemed calm, instinctively knowing what to do. Sarah sat with her, offering quiet encouragement, checking her watch, timing contractions, ready to intervene if anything seemed wrong. 3 hours passed, then 4. Luna was working hard, panting, occasionally whining, but not progressing. Sarah called the vet. Dr. Morrison talked her through what to look for, asked detailed questions, then said the words that made Sarah's stomach drop. Something was wrong. Luna needed to get to the clinic immediately. The drive to Fredonia normally took 45 minutes. Sarah made it in 28, pushing her truck faster than she should have on the winding mountain roads, one hand on the wheel and one reaching back to touch Luna, who lay in the back seat making sounds Sarah had never heard her make. Pain sounds. Fear sounds. Dr. Morrison was waiting. She examined Luna quickly, her expression growing more serious. The puppies were in distress. Their heartbeats were irregular. Luna's temperature was spiking. There was an infection, and it was spreading fast. Dr. Morrison could try an emergency C-section, but with this kind of infection, the chances of saving the puppies were almost zero. The focus had to be on saving Luna. Sarah made the only choice she could. Save Luna. The dog who had saved her. The partner who had brought light back into her darkness. The puppies had never drawn breath, never opened their eyes. But Luna was here, real, depending on Sarah to protect her. The surgery took 2 hours. Sarah sat in the waiting room and bargained with whatever force might be listening. Take anything else. Take the cabin. Take the job. Take whatever was needed. Just let Luna survive. Just give her that one thing. Dr. Morrison came out just after midnight. Luna had made it through surgery. But there had been complications. The infection had been worse than initially thought. 6 puppies, all deceased before delivery, could even be attempted. Luna's uterus had been so damaged it had to be removed. The dog would live, but she would never have puppies again. Sarah was allowed to see her an hour later. Luna was conscious but groggy from anesthesia. When she saw Sarah, she tried to lift her head, tried to wag her tail. Sarah knelt beside the exam table and pressed her face into Luna's fur and wept. For the puppies who never got a chance. For Luna, who would wake up fully and realize her babies were gone. For the cruelty of a world where sometimes trying to create life only led to more loss. They went home the next morning. Dr. Morrison sent them with pain medication, antibiotics, detailed care instructions. Luna moved slowly, carefully, the surgical site obviously painful despite the medication. But it was her eyes that broke Sarah's heart. They kept searching, looking around the cabin, into corners, under furniture, looking for the puppies she knew should be there. Sarah had removed the whelping box before they got home, not wanting Luna to see it empty. But Luna went straight to where it had been, stood in that spot and whined. A high, desperate sound that made Sarah's throat close. Then Luna lay down in that exact place and would not move. That was 4 months ago. 147 days of watching Luna exist in the smallest, quietest way possible. The vet said she was physically healthy. The incision had healed perfectly. The infection was gone. But Luna had simply stopped engaging with life. She ate because Sarah begged her to. She went outside because Sarah carried her there. She existed, but she was not living. Sarah tried everything. She took Luna on their favorite trails, to the meadows where they used to play. Luna would walk beside her obediently, but showed no interest in the sights or smells that used to captivate her. Sarah tried toys, treats, games. Luna would watch with dull eyes, occasionally participating if Sarah insisted, but there was no joy in it, no spark. Other rangers noticed. Tom stopped by one afternoon in September and spent 30 minutes trying to engage Luna in play. The dog barely acknowledged him. When he left, he pulled Sarah aside and said gently that maybe it was time to accept that Luna might never recover. That some grief was too deep. That sometimes the kindest thing was to let go. Sarah could not accept that. Would not. Luna had saved her life after Michael died. Had given her reason to wake up each morning, to keep going, to remember that the world still held good things. Sarah was not giving up on her. Not after 4 months. Not after 4 years. Not ever. But privately, in the dark hours of early morning, when she lay awake listening to Luna's quiet breathing from across the room, Sarah wondered if Tom was right. Wondered if she was being selfish, keeping Luna alive when the dog clearly wanted to check out. Wondered if love sometimes meant knowing when to let go. The snow came harder now, wind driving it horizontal across the meadow. Sarah added another log to the fire and checked her supplies. The Weather Service had upgraded their warning twice in the past hour. This would be the first major storm of the season, and it was shaping up to be memorable. She had enough firewood stacked on the porch for a week. The generator had fuel. Her pantry could sustain her through a month of isolation if needed. This was not her first winter at 8,000 feet. Sarah had been a ranger for 34 years. She had started when she was 24, fresh out of college with a forestry degree and romantic notions about living in harmony with nature. The reality had been harsher than her imagination. Long hours, low pay, physical labor that left her exhausted. Dealing with tourists who ignored safety warnings, poachers who saw wildlife as commodities, developers who wanted to pave over everything wild and beautiful. But she had also witnessed things that made every hardship worthwhile. She had seen elk migrations that number in the thousands, a river of living animals flowing through the valleys. She had watched eagles teach their young to fly, the adults patient and persistent as the juveniles figured out how to use their wings. She had been present for births and deaths, for the brutal and beautiful cycles that govern the natural world. She had learned early that the job required a certain hardness. You could not save everything. You could not intervene every time an animal suffered. Nature was not cruel, but it was indifferent. A late-born fawn might starve when winter came early. A bird with a broken wing would be picked off by predators. An elk calf separated from its mother would die alone and afraid. That was the way of things. The ranger's job was to protect the ecosystem as a whole, not individual animals. Sarah had made peace with that philosophy over decades of work. She had watched animals die and told herself it was necessary, natural, right. She had turned away from suffering because intervention would do more harm than good in the long run. She had become the kind of ranger who could make hard choices without flinching. At least, she thought she had. Luna lifted her head slightly when Sarah walked past, but did not follow. Sarah paused to run her hand over the dog's fur, feeling the bones more prominent than they should be beneath her palm. Despite Sarah's best efforts, Luna had lost 15 pounds since June. The vet said it was not dangerous yet, but if she kept losing weight, it would become a serious concern. Sarah had tried everything to increase Luna's appetite. She cooked special meals, chicken and rice, beef and sweet potatoes, all the things Luna used to love. The dog would eat a few bites to please Sarah, then turn away. Sarah had tried multiple brands of dog food, different flavors, different textures. She had tried hand feeding, warming the food, adding broths and gravies. Nothing worked. Luna ate just enough to survive and no more. The weight loss made Luna look older than her 3 years. Her coat, once thick and lustrous, hung loose on her frame. Her movements were slower, more careful, as if she were conserving energy. She looked like a dog twice her age, worn down by life. Sarah thought about Tom's words constantly. Maybe it was time to let go. Maybe keeping Luna alive when she clearly did not want to be alive was cruelty disguised as love. But every time Sarah started to seriously consider it, she would remember the way Luna used to be. The joy, the enthusiasm, the pure delight she took in simply existing. That dog was still in there somewhere. Sarah had to believe that. By nightfall, the world outside had vanished into white chaos. Sarah could barely see the thermometer anymore, though she knew it had dropped below zero. The wind screamed around the corners of the cabin, finding every tiny gap, every weakness in her defenses. She had lived through bad storms before, but this one felt different, angrier, more personal. She had weathered her first winter in this cabin with Michael 33 years ago. They had been newly married, both young and idealistic, convinced that love and determination could overcome any challenge. That winter had nearly broken them. They ran out of firewood in January and had to burn furniture to stay warm. A pipe burst and flooded the kitchen. The isolation got to both of them, and they had their worst fight ever, screaming at each other over something neither could remember later. But they had survived. They learned. They prepared better the next year and the year after that. They figured out how to be together in small spaces for long periods. They learned that love was not just the grand gestures, but the daily choice to be patient, kind, forgiving, to see the other person at their worst and choose them anyway. Michael had been her best friend. They worked together, hiked together, spent nearly every moment together, and somehow never got tired of each other's company. He made her laugh. He challenged her thinking. He supported her dreams while pursuing his own. They had planned to retire together, to travel, to finally take all those trips they had postponed because of work. Then he was gone. One moment they were hiking, discussing where to have lunch, and the next he was on the ground, his eyes wide with shock and fear. Sarah had tried CPR, had screamed for help even though she knew no one could hear her, had bargained and pleaded and demanded that the universe not do this to her. But Michael died anyway, right there on the trail where they had been so happy. The grief had nearly killed her too. For months, she functioned on autopilot. She went through the motions of her job because she did not know what else to do. She ate because her body demanded it. She slept because eventually exhaustion won. But she was not really living. She was just existing, waiting for the pain to either diminish or destroy her. Getting Luna had changed that. The puppy needed her, depended on her, gave her a reason to get up in the morning beyond mere obligation. Luna had dragged Sarah back into the world of the living, one day at a time, with her puppy antics and unconditional love and the simple fact of her warm presence. Now Luna was the one who had checked out, and Sarah understood, perhaps more than most people could, exactly what her dog was going through. The emptiness. The feeling that something vital had been ripped away. The sense that going through the motions of life was pointless when the thing that made life worth living was gone. But Sarah also knew something Luna did not. She knew that grief, while it never truly ended, could transform into something bearable. That life could be good again, different but still worthwhile. That love lost did not negate love found. She needed Luna to hold on long enough to discover that truth for herself. Sarah was heating soup on the propane stove when Luna suddenly lifted her head. The dog's ears swiveled forward, her whole body tensing in a way Sarah had not seen in months. Then Luna stood up, walked to the back door, the one that faced the forest. For a moment, Sarah just stared, the soup forgotten. Luna was moving with purpose, with intention, with something that looked almost like urgency. It was so unexpected that Sarah's first thought was that something was medically wrong. A seizure, maybe, or some kind of neurological event. But Luna's posture did not suggest distress. She moved to the door and pressed her nose against the glass, her breath fogging the window. A small sound emerged from her throat. Not quite a whine, not quite a whimper. Something else entirely. Something Sarah had never heard her make. Sarah set down her spoon and watched, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had taken hold. Luna pressed harder against the glass, her paws coming up to scratch at the door. The sound she was making grew louder, more insistent. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and aimed it through the glass. At first she saw nothing but snow and darkness, the beam swallowed by the storm. Then she adjusted the angle, and the light caught something. Two reflective eyes, green-gold in the beam. Low to the ground. She moved the flashlight slowly, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. A fawn stood on the back porch, no more than 3 feet from the door. It was tiny, probably born late in the season, maybe September or even October. Those late births rarely survived, even in good conditions. In a storm like this, the fawn had no chance at all. Its legs trembled violently. Ice had formed on its face and ears, white crystals clinging to its fur. As Sarah watched, the fawn took one stumbling step forward and collapsed against the glass, its small body hitting the door with a soft thump. Luna's cry became louder, more insistent. She pawed at the door, looking back at Sarah with desperate urgency, then at the fawn, then at Sarah again. The message was unmistakable. Open the door. Let in. Help. Sarah's hand was already reaching for the doorknob before her training stopped her. Before 34 years of experience slammed into her consciousness like a physical blow. She had been a wildlife ranger for more than 3 decades. She knew the protocols. She had written some of them. You did not interfere with nature. You did not bring wildlife into human spaces. You especially did not hand-raise wild animals because it destroyed their ability to survive on their own. She had given lectures on this topic, had supervised younger rangers, and corrected them when they got too emotionally involved with the animals they were supposed to be protecting. Had explained, patiently and repeatedly, that individual animal suffering was unfortunate but necessary. That the ecosystem required death as much as life. That rangers who tried to save every creature in distress ended up doing more harm than good. She had watched countless animals die because it was the right thing to do. The hard thing. The necessary thing. A fawn this small, this late in the season, without its mother, would not survive anyway. Bringing it inside, warming it up, feeding it, would only prolong the inevitable. And if by some miracle it did survive, it would be habituated to humans. Unafraid, vulnerable, unable to function in the wild. It would be a death sentence delivered slowly instead of quickly. The fawn lifted its head and looked directly at her through the glass. Sarah could see its ribs beneath its wet fur, could see how it shivered, violent tremors that shook its whole body, could see, unmistakably, that it would not survive the night outside. She turned away from the door, made herself walk back to the stove, made herself pick up her spoon. That was protocol. That was her job. That was 34 years of experience telling her that sometimes the kindest thing was to let nature take its course. Luna did not follow. She stayed at the door and began to cry. Not the small sounds from before. Real cries, building in intensity, desperate and pleading. It was not a sound Sarah had ever heard from her, not even in the awful days after losing the puppies. This was different. This was primal. Luna scratched at the door, her claws leaving marks on the wood Sarah had just refinished in September, spending a weekend sanding and staining because she needed to keep her hands busy. Then Luna pressed her whole body against the glass and howled. The sound cut through the storm, through the walls, through every defense Sarah had built around her heart. It was the sound of a mother who had lost her babies begging for a chance to save this one. The sound of pure desperate need. The sound of something breaking and reforming at the same time. Sarah closed her eyes, tried to remember her training, tried to remember why the rules existed. Wildlife that became dependent on humans died anyway, just slower and more painfully. Deer carried diseases that could spread to livestock or humans. They were wild animals, not pets, and treating them as such was a fundamental misunderstanding of what they were. Every ranger knew this. Every ranger followed the rules. But Sarah was not just a ranger. She was also a woman who understood grief, who knew what it felt like to lose everything and to need, desperately, to save something. Anything. To prove that loss did not always win. That sometimes there could be a different ending. She looked at Luna, really looked at her, saw the life that had returned to her eyes for the first time in 147 days. Saw her whole body vibrating with purpose, with need, with something that looked terrifyingly like hope. Saw the mother who had lost everything now begging to save something. Tom's words echoed in her memory. Maybe it was time to let go, to accept that Luna might never recover. Sarah had been thinking about those words for weeks, wrestling with them, wondering if she was being selfish by keeping Luna alive. But here was Luna, fully present and engaged for the first time since June, begging Sarah to open a door, to break a rule, to choose compassion over protocol. Sarah made her decision knowing it was wrong, knowing it violated every principle she had spent her career upholding, knowing she might lose her job, knowing that even if she kept her job, she would have to live with the knowledge that she had betrayed everything she claimed to believe about wildlife management. But she also knew that if she turned away from that door, if she let that fawn die while Luna begged her to save it, something would break in both of them that could never be repaired. She opened the door. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath, making her eyes water instantly. Snow immediately began accumulating on her floor, swirling in on wind that felt malicious. The fawn tried to stand and failed, its legs splaying out, too weak and cold to support its weight. Sarah bent down, wrapped her arms around the small body, and lifted. The deer was so light it frightened her. She could feel every rib, every vertebra. Could feel its heart hammering against its ribs, too fast, too desperate, a rhythm that spoke of a body on the edge of failure. She brought the fawn inside and kicked the door closed, shutting out the storm. Luna was there instantly, nosing the small creature, licking the eyes from its face, making small worried sounds deep in her throat. The fawn did not struggle. It simply lay there in Sarah's arms, eyes closed, sides heaving. Sarah grabbed towels from a bathroom and began rubbing the fawn down, trying to generate warmth through friction. The deer's fur was soaked through, frozen in places, the animal's body temperature dangerously low. Luna helped, her tongue working over the deer's ears and face with gentle precision, her movements careful and deliberate. Together they worked. Sarah rubbed the fawn's body, its legs, trying to stimulate circulation. Luna licked its face, cleaned its eyes, removed the ice and snow that clung to its fur. They worked in silent coordination, neither needing to tell the other what to do, both focused entirely on the small life between them. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The fawn's breathing gradually slowed, became less labored. Its shivers decreased in intensity. Finally, it opened its eyes fully and tried to stand. Its legs splayed out on the hardwood floor, unable to find purchase. It went down hard, bleeding in distress, the sound high and frightened. Luna immediately laid down beside it, curling her body around the fawn, sharing her warmth. The deer stopped struggling and tucked itself against the dog's belly, instinct telling it to seek warmth and shelter. Sarah sat back on her heels and watched, her hands shaking from adrenaline and cold and the enormity of what she had just done. She had just committed a career-ending violation. She would need to report this in the morning, face the consequences, possibly lose the job that had been her entire adult life. But Luna was looking at her with something that resembled joy. For the first time in 147 days, her eyes held light instead of emptiness, and the fawn was breathing steadily against her fur, alive when by all rights it should be dead. Sarah made up a bed of blankets near the wood stove, layering them to create a warm nest. Luna carefully nosed the fawn until it stood on shaky legs, then guided it step by step to the makeshift bed Sarah had created. The deer collapsed into the blankets, exhausted. Luna lay down beside it, her body forming a protective curve around the small creature. The dog looked at Sarah, and in that look was everything. Gratitude, purpose, the beginning of healing. Then Luna closed her eyes and, for the first time in 4 months, slept peacefully, her breathing deep and even, one paw resting protectively on the fawn's side. Sarah stayed up watching them, adding logs to the fire, making sure the fawn kept breathing. She knew she should be planning what to say to Roger, rehearsing her explanation, preparing for the consequences. But all she could do was watch Luna sleep peacefully and wonder if sometimes the right choice and the wrong choice could be the same thing. The storm lasted 3 days. Sarah called her supervisor that first morning, ready to face whatever came next. She had rehearsed her explanation, prepared herself for anger or disappointment or immediate suspension. But when she picked up the phone, she got a recording. The phone lines were down. The storm had knocked out infrastructure across the entire region. She tried her cell phone. No signal. The satellite internet worked intermittently, just enough to check the weather forecast, which looked grim. The storm was stalling over the plateau, dump after dump of heavy snow. The roads were impassable. Even if she wanted to drive the fawn to a wildlife rehabilitation facility, which was the proper protocol, she could not. She was completely isolated with a depressed Malamute and an orphaned fawn that by all rights should have died on her porch. In a strange way, it felt like the universe had made the decision for her. She could not report the situation, could not follow protocol, could not do anything except deal with the reality in front of her. So that was what she did. The fawn, which she started calling Beacon because it had appeared like a light in the darkness, grew stronger by the hour. Sarah researched fawn care on her emergency satellite internet connection during the brief windows when it worked. She learned about proper milk replacer, feeding schedules, the importance of not overhandling, the developmental stages fawns went through. She made a run to her storage shed, fighting through waist-deep snow, to retrieve supplies she kept for various emergencies. She found powdered goat milk, which the internet said was an acceptable substitute for deer milk. She sterilized bottles left over from an attempt at goat farming she and Michael had made years ago. She created a feeding station near the fire where she could warm bottles and keep everything clean. Luna never left Beacon's side except to eat and relieve herself, and even then she rushed back as quickly as possible. She licked the fawn clean constantly. She kept it warm with her body. She positioned herself between Beacon and anything she perceived as a threat, including Sarah at first. That was the most surprising part. Luna, who had always been friendly and trusting with Sarah, suddenly became protective to the point of aggression. When Sarah first approached with a bottle of warm milk, Luna stood up, placed herself between Sarah and the fawn, and growled. Actually growled. A low, serious sound that made Sarah freeze. Sarah sat down on the floor, making herself small and non-threatening. She held out the bottle, letting Luna smell it. She spoke in soft, calm tones, explaining what she was doing, why she was doing it. After several minutes, Luna relaxed fractionally and stepped aside, though she watched every movement Sarah made with intense focus. Sarah bottle-fed Beacon for the first time while Luna supervised, her amber eyes tracking Sarah's hands, her body tense and ready to intervene. The fawn lashed onto the bottle eagerly, suckling with desperate hunger, milk dribbling down its shin. When the bottle was empty, Sarah showed Luna how to clean the fawn's face, demonstrating with a damp cloth. Luna watched intently, then immediately began licking Beacon's face and mouth, removing every trace of milk. She was gentle but thorough, and when she was done, she looked at Sarah as if to say she understood now. She knew what was needed. Over the next few days, they developed a routine. Sarah would prepare bottles every 3 hours. Luna would wake Beacon if the fawn was sleeping. Sarah would feed the fawn while Luna watched. Then Luna would clean Beacon while Sarah cleaned the bottles. They worked together like a team, each playing their role, both focused entirely on keeping this small creature alive. Sarah watched Luna transform. The emptiness in her eyes disappeared, replaced by focus and purpose. She started eating again, full meals without prompting, as if she had suddenly remembered she needed strength for the work ahead. She moved with intention and energy instead of the listless shuffle she had adopted since June. On the second day, Sarah caught Luna playing with Beacon. The fawn was stronger now, able to stand and walk short distances. Luna did a play bow, her front end down and her rear end up, tail wagging. Beacon stared at her, confused. Luna bounced sideways, then bowed again. The fawn took a tentative step forward. Luna bounded in a circle around it, moving slowly, carefully, inviting play without frightening. Beacon suddenly prompt, all 4 legs leaving the ground at once in the stiff-legged jump that fawns do. Luna barked happily and responded with her own leap. They began moving around the cabin in a strange, joyful dance, the dog and the deer learning each other's language, finding common ground in the universal language of play. Sarah sat on her couch and cried. Happy tears this time. Relief. Joy. The sight of Luna playing, actually playing, after 4 months of grief-stricken silence, was almost too much to process. By day 4, the storm finally broke. Sarah woke to brilliant sunlight reflecting off fresh snow, everything outside white and clean and crystalline. She could get cell service again, could make the call she had been dreading. She stood outside in the achingly cold morning, her phone in her hand, her supervisor's number pulled up on the screen. All she had to do was press call, report the situation, follow protocol even if it was days late, explain that she had made an emergency decision, that the storm had prevented proper procedures, that she was ready to transfer the fawn to appropriate facilities now that the roads would soon be clear. Inside the cabin, Luna appeared in the doorway with Beacon behind her, both of them backlit by the fire. The fawn's legs were steadier now, its eyes bright and alert. It was still too thin, still fragile, but it was alive and growing stronger. Luna looked at Sarah and wagged her tail. Actually wagged her tail with enthusiasm and joy. Sarah put her phone away. She would make that call eventually, but not today. The days turned into weeks. Sarah returned to work, doing her rounds, checking trail cameras, monitoring wildlife populations. But everything had changed. She no longer came home to emptiness and a grieving dog. She came home to Luna greeting her at the door with full body wiggles, and a Beacon pronking excitedly at her return into a cabin that felt alive again. Luna had appointed herself Beacon's mother, teacher, and guardian. She taught the fawn things Sarah did not know dogs could teach deer. She showed Beacon how to navigate the cabin, how to avoid knocking things over with uncertain legs, how to find the sunny spots that moved throughout the day. She taught Beacon her schedule, waking the fawn for feedings before Sarah even finished preparing bottles. She established boundaries, gently but firmly correcting Beacon when the fawn's play got too rough or when it tried to eat things it should not. She taught Beacon to come when called, to wait patiently, to trust that needs would be met. But it was the communication between them that amazed Sarah most. Luna and Beacon developed an elaborate system of sounds and body language. Luna would make a specific low chuff sound that meant danger, and Beacon would immediately freeze. A different chuff meant come here. A soft woof meant it was okay to play. A particular tilt of Luna's head meant she was listening to something outside that Beacon should pay attention to. Beacon responded with her own vocabulary. A certain bleat meant she was hungry. A different sound meant she was scared. Her ears told stories, forward for interest, back for fear, constantly swiveling to track sounds. Her tail, still short and stubby, would wag when she was happy, tucked when she was uncertain. They slept curled together, Beacon tucked against Luna's belly, just like she had been that first night. Sarah would wake in the morning to find them in the exact same position, Luna's protective curve around the fawn, Beacon's head resting on Luna's leg. It was a picture of such perfect contentment that Sarah started taking photos, knowing that someday she might need proof that this had actually happened. Sarah knew she was on borrowed time. She had not reported the situation. Every day that passed made her violation worse. But she could not bring herself to make that call. Could not bear the thought of taking Beacon away from Luna when their bond had brought the dog back to life. She started documenting everything. She took detailed notes on Beacon's development, on Luna's behavior, on the interactions between them. She told herself it was for scientific purposes, that this unusual cross-species relationship deserved study. But really, she was creating evidence to support what she knew would eventually be a difficult conversation with her supervisors. In late December, Sarah's phone rang while she was out checking a trail camera. It was Roger Bainbridge, her supervisor. Her heart immediately began pounding. Someone had reported her. Or maybe satellite imagery had shown deer tracks leading from her cabin. Or perhaps one of the other rangers had stopped by and seen something. But Roger's tone was casual. He was calling to check in, see how she had weathered the big November storm, make sure she had everything she needed for the rest of winter. They talked for 15 minutes about work, about budget allocations for next year, about a poaching case in the northern section. Finally, Roger said, "How's Luna doing?" Tom mentioned he was worried about her last time we talked. Sarah's mind raced. This was her opening, her chance to report the situation, explain what had happened, maybe get ahead of the consequences. But the words that came out of her mouth were, "She's doing much better. Really turned a corner recently. I think she just needed time." It was not a lie exactly. Luna was doing better. But Sarah knew she was lying by omission, and the weight of it sat heavy in her chest for the rest of the day. That evening, she sat Luna and Beacon down, even though she knew the fawn could not understand her words. "I'm protecting you," she said. "Both of you. But I don't know if that's the right thing to do. I'm breaking rules I follow my whole career. I'm lying to people I respect. And I don't know what the right answer is anymore." Luna leaned against her leg. Beacon, braver now, approached and nuzzled Sarah's hand. They did not have answers, but they trusted her. That trust felt like both a gift and a burden. January brought some of the coldest weather Sarah had experienced in her decades on the plateau. The thermometer regularly dropped below -15. The wind made it feel even colder. Sarah kept the fire going constantly, burning through her, would supply faster than anticipated. She made trips to the woodshed multiple times a day, each journey an exercise in endurance against the cold. Luna and Beacon seemed unbothered by the weather when they went out for brief bathroom breaks. Luna's thick coat was designed for extreme cold. Beacon's winter coat had come in thick and healthy, the good nutrition Sarah provided showing in the fawn's glossy fur and steady growth. Beacon was getting bigger, not dramatically, but noticeably. The fawn that had been small enough for Sarah to carry easily now had to be guided out the door for bathroom breaks. Its legs were longer, steadier, strong enough to support confident movement. Its face was losing some of the delicate baby proportions, becoming more defined. Sarah knew what this meant. Beacon was growing up. Soon the fawn would be too large to keep in the cabin comfortably. Soon it would need more space, more exercise, more stimulation than a cabin could provide. Soon, Sarah would have to make decisions she had been avoiding. But for now, through the darkest, coldest part of winter, they were a family. An unlikely, probably unsustainable, definitely a legal family. But a family nonetheless. Luna continued to transform. She was fully herself again, the dog Sarah remembered from before the pregnancy. She played enthusiastically, throwing toys in the air, pouncing on them, bringing them to Sarah for games of tug. She ate with appetite, sometimes even finishing Beacon's leftover bottle milk. She greeted each day with enthusiasm, waking Sarah with gentle nose nudges and excited wags. But there was something new in Luna too, a depth that had not been there before. She was more patient, more attentive, more aware. Loss had changed her. Grief had marked her. But the opportunity to love and nurture Beacon had allowed her to integrate that pain into something beautiful instead of destructive. Sarah recognized the transformation because she had experienced something similar after Michael died. The grief never went away entirely, But eventually, it became part of who she was rather than something that defined her. She carried Michael with her in everything she did, not as a wound, but as a gift. She suspected Luna was learning the same lesson, carrying her lost puppies not as an open wound, but as a bittersweet memory that made her present joy more precious. In early February, Sarah finally made the call she had been dreading. She sat in her truck at the trailhead, where cell service was strongest, her phone in her hand, Roger's number on the screen. She had practiced this conversation 100 times, had tried to find words that would explain without excusing, that would be honest without being self-indulgent. She pressed call before she could change her mind. Roger answered on the second ring. They exchanged pleasantries. Then Sarah took a breath and said, "Roger, I need to tell you about something that happened during the November storm. I made a decision that violated protocol, and I need to report it now, even though it's late." She heard the change in his tone immediately, the shift from casual to professional. "Go ahead." Sarah told him everything. The fawn appearing during the storm, Luna's reaction, her decision to bring the fawn inside, the 3 days of isolation that prevented immediate reporting, the development of the relationship between Luna and Beacon, her continued choice not to separate them even after she could have. When she finished, there was a long silence. Then Roger said, "How long has the fawn been with you?" 3 months, Sarah admitted. Another silence. Then, "Is the fawn healthy?" "Yes. Thriving." "And Luna? How is she?" "The change has been remarkable. She's fully engaged again. The depression is completely gone." Roger was quiet for so long Sarah thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, "Sarah, I've known you since you started. You've saved this corridor more times than I can count. You've trained half the rangers in this region. You wrote the manual we use for wildlife conflict resolution." Sarah waited, her heart pounding. "If you think this is right, I trust your judgment. Document everything. We'll call it a special circumstance wildlife rehabilitation case. Keep it quiet. And Sarah, when it comes time to release the fawn, do it right. No shortcuts." Sarah sat in her truck for 10 minutes after the call ended, crying with relief and gratitude and the overwhelming weight of responsibility. Roger was trusting her, believing in her judgment, giving her the space to see this through properly. She could not let him down. That evening, she started a detailed journal. She documented Beacon's weight, measurements, behaviors. She recorded Luna's interactions with the fawn, noting teaching moments, play sessions, discipline. She wrote about her own observations, the ways this relationship seemed to be working, the concern she had about eventual release. She was creating a record that might justify her choices or might condemn them. But either way, it would be honest. February moved into March. The snow began to melt, though slowly. The temperature crept above freezing during the day, dropping back below at night, creating treacherous ice conditions. Sarah did her work carefully, aware that a broken leg out here could be fatal with no way to get help quickly. Beacon continued to grow. The fawn was nearly as tall as Luna now, gangly in the way of young deer, all legs and ears. It could no longer comfortably fit in the sleeping spot by the fire that had been its bed for months. Sarah opened up more of the cabin, rearranging furniture to create space for a growing deer. She also started taking Beacon outside for longer periods. At first, just 10 minutes at a time, staying close to the cabin. Luna accompanied them, of course, acting as both guardian and guide. She showed Beacon where to find the best browse, pushing snow aside to reveal dried grasses and low shrubs. She taught the fawn to be alert, to pay attention to sounds and smells, to recognize potential dangers. Sarah watched these lessons with fascination. Luna was teaching Beacon how to be a deer, or at least how to survive in the wild. It was instinctive knowledge the fawn should have learned from its mother, and somehow Luna was filling that role across the species divide. But Sarah also started to worry. Beacon showed no fear of humans or dogs, which was exactly what wildlife rehabilitation protocols were designed to prevent. The fawn came when called. It sought comfort from both Sarah and Luna. It had learned to trust, which was wonderful for building a bond, but potentially fatal in the wild. Sarah knew she would need to address this, would need to start creating distance, reintroducing the wariness that wild animals needed. But every time she tried to be cold or distant, Luna would look at her with confusion, and Beacon would approach with such open trust, and Sarah's resolve would crumble. She was failing at the one thing wildlife rehabilitators had to get right. She was creating a deer that would not be able to survive on its own. And the worst part was that she knew it, understood the consequences, and kept failing anyway. In late March, Sarah had a conversation with Dr. Morrison, the veterinarian who had tried to save Luna's puppies. Sarah drove to Fredonia with blood samples from Beacon, asking the vet to check for diseases or parasites. Dr. Morrison ran the tests, which came back clean, then looked at Sarah seriously. "You know you're going to have to let that fawn go eventually," she said. "I know, and you know that the longer you wait, the harder it will be. For all of you. I know that too." Dr. Morrison studied her. "What are you waiting for?" Sarah did not have a good answer. "Spring, maybe. Warmer weather. Beacon to be a little bigger, a little stronger. Luna to be ready. Herself to be ready. All those things and none of them. I'm waiting for it to feel right," she finally said. Dr. Morrison nodded slowly. "Just don't wait too long. That fawn needs to learn to be wild while it still can." Sarah drove home, thinking about those words. Beacon needed to be wild. But was it possible to teach wildness in captivity? To create fear and wariness in an animal that had only known love and safety? Sarah did not know. But she was running out of time to figure it out. April brought real warmth, the snow melting rapidly, the meadow emerging brown and muddy. Wildflowers would come soon, then the full green explosion of mountain summer. It was Sarah's favorite time of year, the world waking up after winter's sleep. Luna seemed to sense that change was coming. She began taking Beacon farther from the cabin during their outings, sometimes gone for hours. Sarah would watch through binoculars as they moved through the forest, Luna leading, Beacon following, both alert and focused. One day, Sarah followed them at a distance. She watched as Luna led Beacon to a meadow about a mile from the cabin. Luna lay down at the edge of the tree line. Beacon grazed in the meadow, moving naturally, confidently. After 20 minutes, Luna stood and began walking back toward the cabin. Beacon followed immediately. But the next day, Luna did the same thing. Led Beacon to the meadow, lay down, waited. This time, when Luna stood to leave, she walked several steps, then stopped and looked back. Beacon started to follow, then paused. Luna kept walking. Beacon took a few steps after her, then stopped and looked back at the meadow. Luna waited, patient, letting the fawn decide. After a long moment, Beacon returned to grazing. Luna watched for another minute, then continued walking back toward the cabin. Alone. Sarah's heart clenched. This was it. Luna was teaching Beacon to be independent, was giving her the chance to choose the wild over the comfort of home. The dog who had clung so desperately to this fawn was now actively preparing to let her go. But when they reached the cabin, Luna went back out. Sarah watched her return to the meadow, lie down in her spot at the tree line, and wait. She stayed there for 3 hours before Beacon finally finished grazing and approached her. They walked home together, side by side. This pattern continued for weeks. Luna would lead Beacon out, wait while the fawn explored and grazed, then give her the choice to return alone or with Luna. Sometimes Beacon chose to stay longer. Sometimes she followed Luna immediately. But she always came home. Until one day in early May, she did not. Sarah was working at her desk when Luna came home alone. The dog seemed calm, not distressed. She drank water, ate a small snack Sarah offered, then lay down in her spot by the door. She was not upset. She was waiting. 3 hours passed. Then 4. Sarah tried not to panic. This was normal, she told herself. This was healthy. Beacon was almost 6 months old now, nearly grown. The fawn needed time alone, needed to practice being independent. But as dusk approached and Beacon still had not returned, Sarah's anxiety grew. She grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the meadow where Luna had been taking the fawn. Luna followed, but her body language suggested she was accompanying Sarah rather than searching desperately. They found Beacon in the meadow, lying in the tall grass. The fawn stood when she saw them, walking over immediately to touch noses with Luna. She was fine, healthy, just enjoying the spring evening. Sarah felt foolish for panicking, but she also recognized what this meant. Beacon was ready, could survive on her own, would be okay without them. That night, Sarah sat Luna down for a serious conversation. It was absurd, talking to a dog as if she could understand complex concepts. But Sarah needed to say the words aloud, and Luna was the only one who would understand. "She's ready," Sarah said. "You've prepared her perfectly. She knows how to find food, how to stay alert, how to survive. You've given her everything she needs." Luna watched her with those amber eyes, patient and attentive. "Well, you need to let her choose now. Don't bring her back if she wants to stay out. Don't go looking for her if she stays in the forest. She needs to find her wild family, needs to learn to be with other deer. You've given her the foundation. Now you have to trust that it's enough." Luna leaned against Sarah's leg, a gesture of understanding or comfort or both. The next morning, Luna led Beacon out just like always. Sarah watched them go, her heart heavy with knowledge. This might be the last time. Today might be the day Beacon chose the forest over the cabin. But Beacon came home that evening, and the next, and the next. For 3 weeks, the pattern continued. Beacon stayed out longer each day, coming home later, sometimes just asleep. But she kept coming home. Sarah knew she should stop it, should close the door, force the separation that needed to happen. But she could not. Not yet. And Luna, who had been preparing Beacon for this moment, seemed content to let the fawn make the choice in her own time. Then, on a clear night with a full moon, it happened. Luna and Beacon went out together in the late afternoon. The evening came. Then full darkness. Sarah waited, watching the tree line, straining to see movement in the moonlight. Luna came home alone at midnight. She looked at Sarah, and in that look was everything. "Goodbye. Thank you. I understand." Sarah's throat closed. She stayed out. Luna walked to her water bowl, drank, then went to the back door and looked out into the night. Her posture was calm, almost peaceful. "Is she okay? Do you think she's okay?" Luna turned from the door and walked to Sarah. She sat on Sarah's feet, leaning her full weight against Sarah's legs. It was a gesture she had done thousands of times over their years together. A gesture that said, "I'm here, you're here, we're okay." Sarah sat down on the floor and wrapped her arms around her dog. They stayed like that for a long time, both looking toward the door, both knowing that something precious had just ended and that they had been lucky to have it at all. Beacon did not come home the next morning, or that afternoon. Sarah tried to work, but could not concentrate. She kept looking toward the tree line, waiting for movement that did not come. Luna seemed unconcerned. She went about her day normally, eating well, going out to relieve herself, bringing toys to Sarah for play. If she was grieving, she did not show it. But that evening, Luna went to the back door and stared out. Sarah joined her. Together they watched the darkness, and Sarah understood that Luna was not grieving. She was waiting, hoping, wondering if Beacon would choose to come back one more time. The fawn did not appear. Sarah went to bed feeling hollowed out. She had known this was coming, had prepared for it, understood it was necessary. But understanding did not make it hurt less. She woke at dawn to find Luna standing at the back door, tail wagging slowly. Sarah rushed over and looked out. Beacon stood at the edge of the tree line, backlit by early morning sun. The fawn looked healthy, confident. She was not alone. Another young deer stood beside her, a little bigger, probably a buck based on size. Sarah opened the door quietly. Luna stepped out onto the porch, but went no farther. Beacon walked forward, stopping about 20 feet away, close enough to make contact, far enough to maintain distance. The two animals looked at each other across that space. Luna's tail wagged slowly. Beacon's ears were forward, her posture relaxed. They held that connection for several minutes, neither approaching, neither retreating. Then Beacon turned and walked back to the other young deer. She looked back once, meeting Luna's eyes. The dog's tail wagged a little faster. The fawn flicked her white tail twice. Then they were gone, melting into the forest. Luna stood on the porch for another 5 minutes, watching the spot where Beacon had disappeared. Then she turned and walked back inside. She went to her food bowl and ate a full breakfast, something she had not done in days. After eating, she brought Sarah her leash, ready for their morning hike. Life continued. Sarah returned to her regular routine, and Luna was once again her full-time companion. They checked trails together, monitored wildlife, documented the changing seasons. Luna was fully herself, engaged and enthusiastic, showing no signs of the depression that had nearly destroyed her. But sometimes, Sarah would catch her sitting at the tree line during their hikes, looking into the forest with an expression Sarah recognized. The look of a mother wondering about her child. Sarah wondered too. She documented deer tracks throughout her territory, but could never be certain which ones belonged to Beacon. She told herself this was for the best. Wild animals needed to be wild. Beacon needed to be with other deer, needed to learn the social structures and survival skills that Luna could not teach her. But Sarah missed her, missed the sound of hooves on hardwood, missed the sight of a young deer pronking through the cabin, missed the improbable family they had been for those few months. Summer came fully, the plateau transforming into a sea of wildflowers and thick grass. The meadows were full of deer, does with their spotted fawns, young bucks and bachelor groups. Sarah and Luna saw deer every day during their work, but none of them were Beacon. Or at least, Sarah did not think so. It was getting harder to tell. The fawns born this year were growing quickly, and Beacon would be nearly a yearling now, blending in with the others. Indistinguishable. That thought should have comforted Sarah. It meant Beacon had successfully transitioned to wildlife, had become just another deer. But it also meant losing even the possibility of recognition, of knowing how her story ended. Then one day in late July, something extraordinary happened. Sarah was doing a survey of the northern meadow, checking plant populations, when Luna suddenly went rigid. Her ears swiveled forward. Her tail began to wag slowly, then faster. She looked at Sarah and barked once, sharp and excited, then took off running. Sarah followed, her heart pounding though she did not know why. When she reached the next clearing, she stopped so abruptly she nearly fell. A young doe stood in the center of the meadow. She was healthy, well-muscled, her coat glossy in the summer sun. Luna approached slowly, her whole body wiggling with joy. The doe did not run. Instead, she walked forward until she and Luna were nose to nose. Sarah watched from the tree line, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. The dog and the deer touched faces, recognizing each other instantly. Beacon. It had to be Beacon. They circled each other, touching noses, the reunion clearly mutual and joyful. Beacon made soft sounds, and Luna responded with small whines of happiness. There was no fear in the young deer, no wariness. This was family meeting family. Then something else emerged from the tree line on the far side of the meadow. Another deer, larger, male, with small antlers just beginning to develop. He stayed back, cautious, watching Luna with clear wariness. Beacon moved between them, touching her nose to the young buck's neck, then to Luna's face, seeming to make introductions. Luna sat down, her tail sweeping the grass. She made no move to chase, to hunt, to do anything except radiate welcome. The young buck took a tentative step closer. Then another. His body was tense to flee, every muscle ready to explode into motion. But Beacon moved back to him, nuzzled him, then looked at Luna, as if seeking reassurance. Luna's tail wagged harder. She did a small play bow, the gesture clear and friendly. The young buck relaxed fractionally. He took another step forward, then another. Finally, he was close enough to touch noses with Luna, though his whole body remained tense. Beacon pronged in a circle around them both, her joy so pure and physical it made Sarah's throat tight. She bounced and leaped, moving between Luna and the buck, clearly delighted to bring her two worlds together. Then the young doe did something that made Sarah's eyes burn. She walked over to where Sarah stood frozen at the clearing's edge. She approached to within 5 feet and simply looked at her. In that look, Sarah saw recognition, memory, gratitude, the acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. The cold night, the warm cabin, the months of care, the impossible bond that had saved 3 lives, the dog who had lost everything, the woman who had broken every rule, and the fawn who should have died but instead lived. "You're welcome," Sarah whispered. "You are always welcome." Beacon held her gaze for another moment, then turned and bounced back to Luna. The two animals stood together in the clearing as the sun painted everything gold. The young buck approached more closely, his wariness decreasing as he took his cues from Beacon. Sarah watched as her dog sat calmly, letting these wild creatures approach, showing only friendship and warmth. The young buck finally relaxed enough to graze, keeping one eye on Luna, but no longer ready to bolt. They stood like that for perhaps 10 minutes, a strange tableau of cross-species trust. Then Beacon seemed to decide it was time to go. She touched noses with Luna one more time, looked back at Sarah, and turned toward the forest. The young buck followed immediately. At the tree line, Beacon paused. She looked back, meeting Luna's eyes across the meadow. The dog's tail wagged slowly, steadily. The doe flicked her white tail twice, a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or farewell or both. Then the deer were gone, melting into the shadows. Luna walked back to Sarah and sat on her boot, leaning against her leg. They stood together in the meadow, watching the place where the deer had vanished. "She came back to say thank you," Sarah said quietly. "She wanted you to meet her friend, to know she's okay." Luna leaned harder against her leg. Sarah would have sworn the dog was smiling. They saw Beacon 3 more times that summer and into autumn. Each visit was brief, but meaningful. The young doe would appear when Luna was near, always accompanied by the buck, sometimes with other deer. She kept a respectful distance but always made contact, touching noses with Luna, letting the dog know she was healthy and whole. Luna never tried to approach Beacon beyond what the deer initiated. She would simply sit and wait, letting Beacon come to her or not as she chose. Sometimes they would touch and then separate. Sometimes Beacon would playfully bow, and Luna would respond, and they would dance around each other briefly, separated by safety but connected by memory. The second to last time they saw Beacon was in September. The young doe appeared with a small group of other deer, all females, all around her age. They stayed far back while Beacon approached Luna. The other deer watched nervously, ears swiveling, bodies tense. But they watched Beacon's interaction with the dog, saw that no threat materialized, and gradually relaxed. Sarah understood what she was witnessing. Beacon was teaching other deer that this dog was safe, was building trust across a divide that should not exist. It was potentially dangerous, could lead to these deer losing their natural wariness. But it was also beautiful, a ripple effect of the bond that had started on a stormy November night. The last time they saw Beacon was late October. Sarah and Luna were hiking the ridge trail when the doe appeared on a rocky outcropping above them. She was magnificent now, fully grown, her coat thick for the approaching winter, her body strong and healthy. She looked down at them and stamped once, a gesture of acknowledgement. Luna's tail began wagging hard enough to move her whole back end. Beacon descended the rocks with careful grace and approached them on the trail. The young buck from before, now heavier and more confident, his antlers more developed, followed at a distance. The doe walked right up to Luna, and they touched faces one more time. Then Beacon did something that made Sarah's breath catch. The deer carefully nuzzled the top of Luna's head, the exact gesture Luna had used on her when she was a frightened, half-frozen fawn on a stranger's porch. It was deliberate, unmistakable, a gift given back. Luna stood perfectly still and accepted it, her eyes closing briefly. When Beacon lifted her head, something passed between them that Sarah could feel but not name. Understanding, maybe. Closure. The acknowledgement that some loves transcend the boundaries we think divide us. Beacon turned and walked back up the rocky slope. At the top, she was silhouetted against the autumn sky, powerful and free and wild in all the ways she was meant to be. She looked down at them one final time, the buck now standing beside her. Then they disappeared over the ridge. Luna watched until there was nothing left to see. Then she looked up at Sarah and pressed against her leg. They stood there together as the sun dropped lower, a woman and her dog, changed forever by a small creature who had taught them both that the heart knows no species, that love can cross any divide, that sometimes the most important rules are the ones we break. Winter came again, the second winter since that November night. Sarah sat by her fire and tried to write the story, but the words felt inadequate. How could she explain what had happened? How could she make people understand the impossible bond, the healing that had occurred, the way three broken lives had found each other and become whole. Luna slept in her usual spot, peaceful and complete. She was fully herself again, the dog Sarah had always known, but with a depth and wisdom that came from loss and love and the sacred trust of motherhood. She had saved Beacon and been saved in return. Outside, the first real snow of the season began to fall. Somewhere in the vast forest, a young doe bedded down with her small herd, safe and wild. She carried within her the memory of the gray guardian who had refused to let her die, who had taught her how to survive, who had loved her across the barriers of species and instinct. Sarah looked at the inadequate words on her screen. Tomorrow she would try again. Tonight she just sat with the gratitude and the grief that came with knowing something beautiful was over, but had existed at all. Luna lifted her head and looked toward the back door. Her tail wagged once, gentle and knowing. Sarah followed her gaze but saw only darkness and falling snow. Yet she understood. Somewhere out there, in the dangerous and beautiful wilderness that was her home, a miracle was living its wild life because a grieving mother had refused to accept that sometimes love must yield to protocol, and a woman had chosen to open a door when every rule told her to keep it closed. Sarah saved the document with a file name no one would ever search for. Then she added another log to the fire, called Luna over for a long scratch behind the ears, and settled in for another winter of keeping watch over a wilderness that held more wonder than any manual could contain. Years would pass. Sarah would eventually retire, but not before training a new generation of rangers, and she would tell them about protocols and rules and the importance of not interfering with nature. But privately, to those who she thought might understand, she would also tell them that sometimes wisdom meant knowing when rules served life and when they stood in its way. Luna would live to be 14 years old, a good long life for a Malamute. She would remain Sarah's constant companion, her partner in all things. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon was full, she would go to the back door and look out into the darkness, and her tail would wag slowly, as if remembering. Sarah never saw Beacon again after that October day. But every spring, a doe with a particular grace in her movements would appear at the meadow edge with her fawns, and those fawns would sometimes approach closer to Sarah and Luna than wild deer should. And Sarah would wonder if Beacon was teaching her children what Luna had taught her, that trust could exist alongside wildness, that love could transcend fear. The story spread quietly through the ranger network, changing and growing as stories do. Some versions were almost accurate. Others veered into fantasy. But the core truth remained. On a freezing November night, a depressed dog had refused to let a fawn die, and in saving that small life, she had saved her own. Sarah never told the full story publicly, never wrote it for publication or shared online. It felt too sacred for that, too private. It was a gift she and Luna had been given, and its value lay not in the telling but in the living. But late at night, when she could not sleep, Sarah would remember. The storm, the small body pressed against the glass door, Luna's desperate cries, the moment of decision, the months of impossible joy, the gradual, painful, necessary letting go, the reunion in the meadow. She would remember and know that she had made the right choice. Not the choice the manuals would have approved, not the choice her training had prepared her for, but the right choice nonetheless. Because sometimes love mattered more than protocol. Sometimes the heart knew what the head could not accept. Sometimes the most important thing was simply opening the door and letting life in, consequences be damned. Luna would sigh in her sleep, dreaming perhaps of small fawn curled against her belly, and Sarah would close her eyes and be grateful for storms that brought unexpected blessings, for dogs that taught humans about devotion, and for the wild creatures that sometimes, against all logic and expectation, let us love them and loved us back. The snow fell steadily, covering the world in white silence. Inside the warm cabin, a woman and her dog slept peacefully, both dreaming of a young deer dancing through meadows, wild and free, and carrying with her the gift of having been, for a brief and precious time, part of an impossible family bound not by blood, but by the kind of love that redefines what family means. And somewhere in the forest, a doe stood watch over her sleeping fawns, her ears swiveling for danger, her body ready to defend her young. She was everything a wild deer should be, wary and strong, and perfectly adapted to her dangerous world. But in her heart, where memory lived, she carried the warmth of a wood stove, the comfort of a gray guardian, and the knowledge that once, when she needed it most, a door had opened and love had been waiting on the other side. That love had saved her life. More than that, it had taught her that the world, for all its harshness, also held unexpected kindness. And she would pass that knowledge to her fawns, and they to theirs, a legacy that would outlast all the individual lives involved. Because love, real love, the kind that breaks rules and crosses boundaries and refuses to accept that some lives matter less than others, that kind of love echoes forward. It changes not just the present but the future. It creates ripples that spread farther than we can see. Sarah understood this in a way she never had before Luna and Beacon taught her. She had spent her career protecting the wild, maintaining boundaries, enforcing rules. But she had learned that sometimes the greatest protection we can offer is simply refusing to look away when something needs help, even when helping breaks every rule we know. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah woke to find Luna already at the door, eager to start the day. They went out together into the crystalline winter landscape, and Sarah felt, as she always did, the privilege of living in this vast, beautiful, challenging place. They hiked to the ridge, the same one where they had last seen Beacon. The snow was deep but not impassable. Luna bounded through it with puppyish enthusiasm, occasionally stopping to let Sarah catch up. From the ridge, Sarah could see for miles the endless forests and meadows that made up her territory, the place she had devoted her life to protecting. Somewhere out there, deer were bedded down in the snow, conserving energy, surviving. Somewhere out there, a young doe who should have died was raising her own fawns, teaching them how to survive, passing on a lesson she had learned from a dog and a woman who had refused to follow the rules. Sarah felt the weight of that responsibility and that gift. She had been part of something extraordinary, something that most people would never experience, something that had shown her that rigid adherence to protocol could sometimes be another name for cowardice, for refusing to see the individual in service to the abstract. But she also knew the risks, knew that another ranger, with different judgment, might have made the same choice and ended up with a habituated deer that had to be euthanized, knew that her choice could have ended tragically instead of beautifully, knew that she had been extraordinarily lucky. She did not recommend other rangers follow her example. When young rangers asked her about difficult decisions, she told them to follow protocols, to trust the wisdom of rules developed over decades of experience. But she also told them to stay open, to remain capable of seeing each situation as unique, to never become so hardened that they stop feeling the weight of their choices. Because that was the real lesson Luna and Beacon had taught her. Not that rules should be broken, but that they should be held lightly enough to examine whether they served life in each specific circumstance. That wisdom meant knowing when to follow the map and when to trust the terrain. Years later, when Sarah finally did retire, Roger gave a speech at her farewell party. He talked about her decades of service, her contributions to wildlife management, her mentorship of younger rangers. But he ended with something unexpected. He said that Sarah had taught him that great rangers were not the ones who followed protocols most rigidly, but the ones who understood when protocols served their purpose and when they stood in the way of something more important. He did not mention Beacon by name, but everyone in the room knew what he was talking about. The story had become legend, told in whispers and knowing looks. Sarah stood to respond, and she found herself with tears in her eyes. She talked about the privilege of her career, the beauty of the work, the importance of the mission. But she also talked about a November night when a storm brought an impossible choice, and how a depressed dog had known better than any protocol what needed to be done. She looked at Luna, old now and gray-muzzled, sleeping in the corner of the room. She taught me, Sarah said simply, that love is not a violation of our duty to the wild. Sometimes it is the purest expression of it. The room was silent. Then Roger started clapping, and everyone joined in, and Sarah sat down feeling like maybe, finally, she had found the words to explain what had happened. Not perfectly. Words could never fully capture it, but close enough. That night, back in the cabin, Sarah and Luna sat by the fire one last time as ranger and dog. Tomorrow Sarah would begin her retirement, would move to a slightly larger place closer to town, would start the next chapter. But tonight, she wanted to sit in the place where everything had changed, with the dog who had changed her, and remember. Luna rested her head on Sarah's lap, and Sarah stroked the soft fur, now more white than gray. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me what mattered, for showing me that sometimes the heart knows better than the head, for being brave enough to stand at that door and refuse to accept that some lives are expendable." Luna sighed contentedly, her eyes closing. In her sleep, her legs twitched, and Sarah imagined she was dreaming of running through meadows with a small fawn bounding beside her, both of them young and strong and full of joy. The fire crackled. The wind whispered around the cabin walls. And Sarah sat in the warm darkness, grateful beyond words for storms that brought blessings, for dogs that understood love better than humans, and for one small deer who had appeared at exactly the right moment to save 3 lives that desperately needed saving. The story would be told for years after, growing and changing, taking on mythic qualities. But those who had been there, who had witnessed it, knew that no embellishment was needed. The truth was extraordinary enough. A dog who had lost everything found purpose in saving one small life. A woman who had devoted her career to non-interference chose compassion over protocol. A fawn who should have died survived and thrived, and went on to live fully in the wild where she belonged. 3 lives, intersecting at exactly the right moment. 3 hearts, opening to each other across species and circumstance. 3 paths that had been broken, finding wholeness through an impossible bond. That was the story. That was the truth. That was what happened on a November night, when a small frozen fawn appeared at a glass door, and a depressed Malamute refused to look away, and a woman, who had spent her life following rules, made the choice to break one. And in breaking it, found exactly what she and Luna needed. Not just the joy of saving one small life, but the proof that love, real love, the kind that risks everything and asks for nothing, can heal wounds we thought were permanent, can bridge divides we thought were absolute, can transform grief into grace. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, a woman and her dog sat by the fire and remembered, and were grateful, and knew that they had been part of something that transcended every boundary and expectation. And somewhere in the vast darkness of the forest, generations of deer would carry forward a strange lack of fear around one particular gray Malamute and her human, a genetic memory of kindness that had been shown when it was needed most, a legacy that would outlast them all. Because that is what love does. It echoes forward. It changes not just the present, but the future. It creates ripples that spread farther than we can imagine, touching lives we will never know, in ways we cannot predict. Sarah understood this now in a way she never had before. And as she sat with Luna, both of them growing older, both of them changed forever by a small fawn who had appeared on a stormy night, she felt at peace with every choice she had made, every rule she had broken, every moment of that impossible, beautiful time. The fire burned low. Luna's breathing deepened into true sleep, and Sarah closed her eyes and let herself remember it all one more time. The fear and the joy and the love that had saved them all, knowing that this memory would sustain her through whatever came next. Proof that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply open the door when something is dying on the other side, and trust that love knows better than fear what the right choice is.